Lancelot and Guinevere. Long after Rome fell and before England had a name, there was a dream called Camelot. It was a place of justice, chivalry, and impossible hope. King Arthur ruled it with ideals, a round table of equals, a sword of myth, and a code that made warriors into legends. And then came Lancelot and Guinevere. This queen, Guinevere, was intoxicating, the kind of woman poets sang about for centuries. Sharp, regal, and proud. As for Lancelot, he was the sword of Camelot, the embodiment of knighthood. Born across the sea in Gaul, trained by the mystical Lady of the Lake, Lancelot was everything a knight should be, and until he wasn't. Their love was never meant to happen, but it did happen, tragically. It began as admiration. Guinevere admired his honor, Lancelot admired her strength. But admiration turned to glances, glances to touches, and touches to midnight meetings behind castle walls. It was the worst kind of betrayal of a husband, a king, and a legend. Because this wasn't any man being betrayed, it was King Arthur, the once and future king, whose destiny was written in steel and stars. The affair rotted Camelot from the inside. Some knew what was happening, but nothing stays hidden forever. Eventually, a knight named Agravian, Arthur's own nephew, exposed them. After being caught in bed, swords were drawn and blood was spilled as Lancelot escaped and Guinevere was seized. Now Arthur had no choice. As king, he had to uphold the law, even if it meant sentencing his own wife to burn alive. Guinevere, tied to the stake, wept in silence as firewood cracked beneath her. Just before the flames kissed her feet, Lancelot returned, cutting down Arthur's guards and fleeing with the queen into the night. That night, Camelot broke out. The Round Table was destroyed as knights began to choose sides. Brother turned on brother. The greatest kingdom in all legend descended into civil war. Arthur led his men against Lancelot, laying siege to his stronghold in France. While the king was away, a young man named Mordred, Arthur's illegitimate son, seized the throne in his absence, declaring Arthur dead. Some even say he tried to marry Guinevere himself. Fortunately, Arthur returned to Britain in fury. The two armies clashed in Camelot, a battlefield soaked in rain and blood. Father and son met blade to blade, and Arthur killed Mordred. Meanwhile, Lancelot, who was still broken by guilt, put down his sword and took up the robes of a monk. On the other hand, Guinevere entered a convent, where she repented until her last breath. They never saw each other again. With Scar. In The Lion King, Mufasa is the regal, golden-maned king of the Pride Lands. He rules with fairness and strength. With Scar. Scar wasn't just the bad guy. He was the original cool villain, always 2 steps ahead. And most importantly, he's been living with resentment his entire life because Scar was born second. Always the spare, never the heir. However, Simba's birth seals Scar's fate. Third in line for the throne, behind both his brother and a bouncy furball who sings about wanting to be king before he even understands what taxes are. Scar's not just bitter, he's furious, and unlike most cartoon villains who wear their evil like a flashing neon sign, Scar smiles. His betrayal doesn't happen in a moment. First, he gains Simba's trust, takes him to a gorge and surprises him with a stampede of wildebeests that Scar himself arranged. Simba runs and Mufasa arrives, leaping into the disarray, saving his son at the last second. On the cliff, Mufasa claws his way up, battered but alive, begging Scar for help. However, his brother uttered 4 words, "Long live the king," and then he throws his own brother to his death. But Scar isn't done. He gaslights Simba, convincing the poor cub that it was his fault. And just like that, the heir to the throne runs away in shame, believing he's a murderer. Scar doesn't just want power, he wants it clean, without anyone to challenge him. And for a while, it works. Scar becomes king, but where Mufasa brought rain and abundance, Scar brings drought, decay, and famine. His rule is lazy and parasitic. The hyenas, who were once his partners in crime, became his enforcers, eating through resources like locusts on a buffet. Pride Rock rots under his reign. The skies turn to ash. The land mourns its fallen king, but evil never stays in power without consequence. Years later, Simba returns as a grown lion with the voice of Matthew Broderick and the spirit of a king. When the truth finally emerges, Scar tries his old tricks again. Manipulations with a fake plea for mercy. But this time, it didn't work. He turns to the hyenas, but they overheard him throw them under the bus just moments before. And hyenas don't forget, especially when they're starving. This brought Scar to the end of his reign. Edmund Pevensies. Few betrayals in fiction cut as deep as Edmund Pevensies in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We're not talking about some petty backstabbing or accidental slip-up. No, Edmund's betrayal is icy, deliberate, and unforgiving. He offers up his own family to a power-hungry tyrant, and all for a sugar rush and a scrap of imagined glory. Edmund's journey into Narnia starts with envy. He's the third Pevensey child, overshadowed by Peter's authority, Susan's maturity, and Lucy's wonder. He's a middle child with a chip on his shoulder, so when he stumbles into Narnia and finds the White Witch, he's already primed to fall, and he does. The Turkish delight isn't just candy, it's laced with magic that addicts the soul. It awakens something in him that the witch exploits immediately, his hunger to be more powerful and more important. She promises him a crown. She promises him respect. She tells him that if he brings his siblings to her, he can be prince, maybe even king. And Edmund doesn't even blink. He returns to the real world, where Lucy is desperately trying to convince Peter and Susan that Narnia is real. Edmund knows it is. He's been there. He's eaten the witch's food, spoken with her, been seduced by her vision. But when Peter and Susan ask him what happened, Edmund says Lucy made it all up. He watches Lucy fall apart, humiliated in front of her siblings, dismissed as a liar, and he says nothing. Just stand there, satisfied. Later, when all 4 of them re-enter Narnia and meet the beavers, everything comes to light. The prophecy, the witch, the return of Aslan. The beavers explain that 4 human children will rise to sit on the thrones at Cair Paravel, and the witch is terrified of that future. She will kill to stop it. So what does Edmund do? He sneaks away in the night. He doesn't just betray them privately this time. He runs directly into the arms of the witch, ready to hand over the only people in the world who truly care about him. Not for gold, not for revenge, but for more Turkish delight, for a title, for the illusion of power. But the witch is no fairy godmother. The moment Edmund arrives empty-handed, without his sibling, she turns on him, strips him of his royal dreams, chains him, starves him, marches him through the snow while he shivers and stumbles, no longer a prince in waiting, but a traitor awaiting execution, and she plans to kill him. She invokes the deep magic, a law older than Narnia itself, and demands Edmund's life. Traitor's blood is hers by right. The witch doesn't forget betrayals, so when Aslan arrives, he offers a trade, himself for Edmund, one life for another. He takes Edmund's place, shorn, humiliated, slaughtered on the stone table in the most Christ-like sacrifice ever penned in children's literature. But betrayal doesn't have the final word. Aslan rises and the deep magic runs deeper still. The witch is defeated. Spring returns to Narnia. The Pevensies take their thrones, and Edmund becomes something unexpected. Just, wise, and kind. He doesn't forget what he did, but that's exactly why he becomes a better ruler than anyone ever thought possible. Peter Baelish in Game of Thrones is one of fiction's most brutal and devastating betrayers. He doesn't sell out his family for candy. He sells out entire kingdoms for chaos. He doesn't want a crown. He wants all the crowns, and he starts his climb on a lie. It begins in his youth when he falls in love with Catelyn Stark, but Catelyn doesn't love him. She loves someone else, Brandon Stark, Ned's older brother, and so Littlefinger is humiliated. And from that pain, a plan is born for power. Years later, Littlefinger is master of coin in King's Landing, and everyone sees him as a harmless bureaucrat with a sly smile and a funny little beard. However, it was a matter of time before the entire War of the Five Kings was triggered by him. He sets the first war with a single letter, a forged message claiming the Lannisters murdered Jon Arryn. Meanwhile, this is a completely made-up lie, and like that, the Starks ride south and walk straight into a trap. Then he turns on Ned Stark, the man whose family once gave him shelter. Ned believes he has an ally in Littlefinger, but Balon puts a dagger to his throat. This is one of the coldest betrayals in the show, and unfortunately, Ned dies as the war begins. But it doesn't stop there. He manipulates Lisa Arryn into killing her husband. He poisons her mind with jealousy and obsession, marries her, and then murders her by pushing her through the moon door. He then tells her son she committed suicide. And at the heart of it all is Sansa Stark. He says he loves her like he loved her mother, but Peter Baelish doesn't love anyone. He's the kind of man who would burn down a city to warm his hands. He brings Sansa to the Boltons, knowing full well what kind of monsters they are, just to position himself closer to the north. Every gesture, every gift, every word he speaks is poisoned with purpose. But Peter makes one mistake. He thinks Sansa is still a pawn. He thinks the game is still his. In the end, it's his own lies that undo him. Sansa, older now, no longer the girl in the red dress afraid of the world, exposes his crimes in front of the entire Vale. She sentences him, and Arya delivers justice. In Shakespeare's Othello, Iago is a puppeteer and a chess master. His betrayal isn't a single stab in the back. It's an intimate psychological siege, and by the time you see the knife, it's already inside you. Othello is an outsider who's risen through the ranks to become a respected gentleman in Venice, a society that tolerates his presence more than it celebrates his achievements. He's powerful, but vulnerable too. Married to Desdemona, a Venetian noblewoman, he stands on shaky ground, admired and doubted in equal measure, and beside him is Iago, his right-hand man, a supposed friend. Everyone, including Othello, calls him Honest Iago, but that's the trick. He's been overlooked and passed over for promotion in favor of a younger, more polished officer, Michael Cassio. It's a snub, and Iago takes it personally, and suddenly he wants Othello ruined. But he doesn't need an army to do it. He needs doubt, insecurity, and implication. So he builds his destruction out of glances, pauses, and planted suggestions. Iago recruits Roderigo, a gullible, love-struck fool obsessed with Desdemona. Iago promises him a shot at her heart in exchange for his obedience and coin. Meanwhile, Roderigo doesn't just buy into the plan, he funds it. He becomes Iago's errand boy, all while thinking he's chasing love. Next, Iago engineers a drunk brawl between Cassio and Roderigo, ensuring Cassio loses his rank. Then he advises Cassio as a friend to seek Desdemona's help in getting back into Othello's good graces. Meanwhile, Iago poisons Othello's mind, suggesting that Cassio and Desdemona are having an affair, and the proof is the handkerchief, Othello's first gift to Desdemona. Iago makes sure it ends up in Cassio's lodging, like evidence planted at a crime scene. It's enough to unmake a man. Othello discovers, and his trust turns to suspicion while Iago watches it happen. Desdemona pleads her innocence, but Othello, poisoned by Iago's lies, kills her with his own hands. Only then does the truth crack through the surface. It's Iago's wife, Emilia, who pieces it together and exposes the truth, but Iago silences her permanently by killing her right there. Othello tries to take Iago down in a final blaze of rage, but fails, and realizing what he's done, what he's lost, and who he's become, Othello takes his own life. He dies beside the woman he once loved and then destroyed, Magneto. Eric Landschaerd doesn't start off as Magneto. He starts as a boy, a Jewish boy in Nazi Germany, dragged away from his parents, screaming with bent gaits and crushed helmets and sparks of a power that makes him less than human in the eyes of men in uniform. That trauma forges him and his pain and his origin story. So when Eric grows up and meets Charles Xavier, an idealist, dreamer, and telepath, they form a real friendship. Since they're both mutants, they both want to make a world where their people are safe, but their philosophies are galaxies apart. Charles wants peace and hope because he believes humans and mutants can live together, if only people try hard enough. Meanwhile, Eric knows better. He knows what people do to those they fear. He's seen it and felt it. Charles sees humanity as misguided siblings. Eric sees them as the next oppressor. So here comes the betrayal. Magneto finds the Brotherhood of Mutants, preaching mutant supremacy. He wages war on every dream of coexistence, destroying Charles' dream, and then throws the pieces back at him. In X-Men First Class, the split becomes literal. They're standing side by side, trying to stop nuclear war, and Eric chooses vengeance. He turns the weapons meant to kill mutants back on the humans who launched them. Charles pleads with him, begs him to stop. Eric looks him in the eyes and does it anyways. In the crossfire, a bullet meant for Magneto hits Charles. It paralyzes him. Magneto doesn't mean for that to happen, but he doesn't undo it either. He cradles his friend, cries even, and still walks away. That's the betrayal. Eric chooses war over peace, anger over love, power over partnership. Charles is left behind in more ways than one, and Eric never really stops. Sure, he saves people, he grieves, he hides in cabins with his daughter and tries to forget, but the rage never leaves him. He believes he's right. He knows the world will never love his people, so he becomes the thing he once feared. He becomes the tyrant who believes salvation must come through domination.